If it had been up to Anne Boleyn, the future Elizabeth I would have had a different name: Mary. Officially, King Henry VIII's second wife justified this choice by noting that the rooms where she gave birth featured representations of the Virgin Mary. In reality, it was an attack on her husband's first child. Anne intended for her daughter to replace Mary entirely, even stripping her of her name. However, this went too far even for the Tudor king, who chose Elizabeth after his own mother and Anne's mother. This situation powerfully illustrates the nature of Anne and Mary's relationship. It was not just the typical strained dynamic between a stepmother and her husband's daughter. It was a mutual attempt to erase each other's identities. Eric Ives, cursed with a huge bias towards Anne Boleyn in his biography, recognizes Mary as an aggressor. She denied Anne's identity and integrity by refusing to acknowledge her as her father's wife. Anne is often portrayed as the good one in this relationship, making 3 attempts to improve her relationship with Mary. It is often said that all aggressions against Henry's eldest child originated from the king himself, or were acts of self-defense on Anne's part. While this is partially true, especially regarding self-defense, it is not entirely accurate. Anne was as much an aggressor in her relationship with Mary as Mary was with her. The king's daughter was also simply defending herself. It is wrong to categorize their relationship into good and evil. Rather, it was a desperate struggle between 2 people. Let us examine this in detail, including the role of Henry VIII, who did everything he could to ensure an understanding between Anne and Mary was impossible. When Anne Boleyn and Mary first met, the young princess likely paid little attention to her father's future wife. Anne was around 21 when she arrived at the royal court, the daughter of a knight, and thus not particularly significant. Mary, then about 6 years old, soon moved to Wales. There have been speculations that the 2 women might have spent time together over their shared passion for dancing, as they would have had to rehearse together. However, we have no concrete evidence of this, and even if it occurred, it was likely uneventful. This holds true even when Henry began showing interest in Anne. It wasn't the first time the king was enamored with another woman, nor was it the first time he fancied a Boleyn. Had Anne been just another mistress, there might never have been any drama between the 2 women, especially since Mary had not been at court for several years. The situation, however, changed dramatically from 1527 onwards. The king's relationship with the lady-in-waiting became public, and to everyone's shock, Henry sought a marital union. By the time Mary permanently returned from Wales to the London area in May 1528, the king had already made Anne his permanent companion. Publicly, their relationship remained cordial at this stage. Anne had to adhere to protocol. Mary was a princess and deserved appropriate treatment, especially since Henry was still a proud and loving father. At only 12 years old, it is uncertain whether Mary fully grasped the unfolding events. However, the situation rapidly deteriorated. The breaking point came in August 1531, when Catherine, Anne, and Henry were together at Windsor. The king and his mistress rode away, never to return. Catherine was sent to Rickmansworth and Mary to Richmond. In the following months, Mary lost everything. Henry renounced Rome, annulled his marriage to her mother, declared Mary illegitimate, and removed her from the line of succession. She was also forbidden from seeing Catherine again. Mary's life was utterly transformed. Once the most important person in her father's life and the most significant child in England, she was now an outcast, forced to live and serve in her half-sister Elizabeth's household by her father's orders. It is easy to see whom she blamed for this: Anne. Mary held Henry's new wife responsible and absolved him completely. Catherine played a role in this perception. She wrote to her daughter, "Daughter, I heard such things today that I do perceive, if it be true, the time is come that Almighty God will prove you, and I am very glad of it, for I trust he doth handle you with a good love. I beseech you, agree to his pleasure with a merry heart, and be you sure that without fail he will not suffer you to perish, if you beware to offend him. Catherine made only one exception regarding Henry's commands. Save only that you will not offend God and lose your own soul. Mary was still a teenager and suddenly completely isolated. In Elizabeth's household, even her longtime friend, Lady Margaret Pole, was not allowed to stay by her side, despite offering to do so at her own expense. Catherine's letters were Mary's only reliable source of comfort and guidance. It doesn't matter if Anne deliberately sought to destroy Mary's identity. It is not crucial that it was Henry's orders that took everything from Mary and humiliated her. Mary perceived Anne as the central problem and was encouraged in this belief. Consequently, she took action against Anne, and the in 1533 newly crowned queen reciprocated. At this point, it is important to separately examine Henry's role. Mary did not understand that she was entangled in two separate conflicts. Anne had replaced her mother and taken away her birthright by giving birth to Elizabeth. Perhaps Mary truly believed that Henry had been bewitched by Anne. The king gratefully embraced this notion a few years later when it came to Anne. Mary was also in conflict with her father, who saw her as a disobedient child needing discipline. Her mother had assured her that he would love her as long as she obeyed him. To Mary, the restriction that she must not lose her soul in the process seemed insignificant. She repeatedly emphasized that she would obey her father in everything except the question of her legitimacy, as she considered her parents' marriage to be valid before God. Although the argument between Mary and Henry repeatedly influenced the conflict between her and Anne, it was on a completely different level. Henry was solely interested in her submission to his orders, which also encompassed their relationship with God. If she obeyed, Mary would receive everything else from him. This was evidenced by the future. Henry reinstated her in the line of succession and made her one of the richest women in England in his will, though he did not declare her legitimate. Until Mary submitted, she was not safe from physical violence. Her father might have even had her executed. Under the Act of Succession, 1534, Mary was guilty of treason for not recognizing Elizabeth and Anne. For Anne, on the other hand, Mary was not just a disobedient daughter. She was the embodiment of all of Anne's fears and anxieties since her rise and the birth of Elizabeth in September 1533. If Mary were to recognize Anne, it would grant the highest possible legitimacy. Due to her refusal, the king's first daughter remained a constant threat. The image conveyed so far is that Anne's expectations of Mary were simple. She should recognize Anne, and then the two women would get along well. This might have been true as long as Anne hoped Elizabeth would be a boy. However, the birth of a girl fundamentally changed the situation, prompting Anne to take visible action against Mary. This conflict extended beyond Anne wanting Elizabeth to be called Mary. Anne also demanded that Catherine of Aragon send Mary's christening gown, believing it belonged to the royal family. However, Catherine had brought it from Spain and refused to send it, as it was her private property. In both instances, Henry had to intervene to stop Anne. Whether he wanted to protect Mary or prevent his wife from becoming too powerful is open to interpretation. Mary's role in Elizabeth's household was driven by Henry, who wanted to break his daughter's stiff-necked Spanish pride. Lady Shelton, responsible for Mary in 1533, was reportedly instructed to beat her whenever she doubted Elizabeth or Anne's status or called herself a princess. This directive likely came from Anne, as reported by Imperial Ambassador Eustace Chapuys, Mary's close confidant. According to Chapuys, the The Queen's aunt was supposed to insult Mary as the cursed bastard. There are theories that Henry was behind this, as there is no source besides Chapuis. However, there is no evidence that it was the king. Lady Shelton was Anne's aunt, and Anne largely determined what happened in Elizabeth's household. Anne later made a mysterious remark in a letter to her aunt, indicating she knew what was happening to Mary, but did not elaborate. It is assumed today that she meant Mary should be married. Anne's vague statements about the future of the king's older daughter likely caused Mary discomfort. Chapuis also reported that Anne once said Mary was her death, and she was Mary's death. If uttered, this was certainly not meant literally, but shows that the Queen regarded her stepdaughter as an enemy. This aligned her with Henry, who once called Mary "my greatest enemy." Rumors also circulated that Anne was planning Mary's death. These rumors, propagated by Chapuis who despise the Queen and Elizabeth, are not particularly credible. Supposedly, Anne wanted to kill her stepdaughter and perhaps Catherine of Aragon if Henry went to France and left her as regent. Her brother George reportedly replied that the king would not approve of this. Anne allegedly responded that she did not care and would like to go to her death, making further threats to curb her proud Spanish blood. If these statements are believed to be true, one might assume Anne was venting her anger without thinking. However, it is possible that Anne didn't intend to kill Mary, but wanted her stepdaughter to hear the rumors and be afraid. The longer Mary refused to acknowledge her, the weaker Anne became. Incidentally, Henry's trip to France was cancelled. Mary learned to defend herself. Despite the beatings, she never ceased denying recognition to Anne and Elizabeth, repeatedly asserting that there was only one princess, herself, and only one queen, her mother. Mary was only willing to recognize Elizabeth in the same manner she recognized her half-brother, Henry Fitzroy, as an illegitimate sibling, acknowledging her father's claim that Elizabeth was his daughter. This implied that Elizabeth might not even be the king's daughter. Later, Mary was more direct, suggesting to Elizabeth's face that her father was Mark Smeaton, one of the men with whom Anne allegedly had an affair. By doing so, Mary cast doubt not only on Anne's legitimacy as queen, but also on her integrity as a wife. When her father visited Elizabeth's household, Mary played the devoted daughter. On one occasion, she knelt before him to say goodbye, reportedly impressing Henry with her submissive gesture. A letter from Mary to Thomas Cromwell indicates she discouraged her followers from seeking honours at the royal court. For instance, she excused the father of one of her servants from receiving knighthood due to his age. The letter, dated the 28th of May, 1533, was written just 3 days before Anne was crowned queen. Traditionally, people were knighted in the days leading up to a coronation. Mary withheld William Wilbraham, the father of a member of Parliament who had served her for over 8 years, from this honour. Mary also toyed with Anne's hopes. When the Queen wrote to her, offering to intercede with Henry if Mary acknowledged her, Mary responded by thanking Lady Pembroke for her father's support, but stated she only recognised her mother as queen. A legend suggests that at some point the two women were together in a chapel, and Anne was informed later that she had ignored a gesture of submission from Mary. Allegedly, Anne immediately wrote an apology, claiming she did not see it and expressing hope for a better relationship. Mary replied that she had done no such thing. If this story is true, it cannot be ruled out that Mary deliberately staged this act to deceive Anne. Anne is said to have offered peace to Mary a total of 3 times, provided Mary would acknowledge her. However, the sincerity of these proposals remains questionable. The last time Queen Anne wrote to Mary was after the death of Mary's mother. Anne offered to be a second mother to her stepdaughter, only expecting respect for her rank. Those who defend Anne in this conflict view this as a minimal concession. It is often mentioned that Anne had just lost a child and was therefore very emotional herself. This perspective, however, can be turned around. Given the clear animosity between the two women, how well an offer to be a second mother could be received after Mary had just lost her first mother, whom she had not been allowed to see for years, is highly questionable. Especially since Anne once again demanded the one thing Mary was unwilling to give. Mary also knew Anne was in a delicate situation, with her father showing interest in Jane Seymour. Anne needed reconciliation and recognition from Mary to strengthen her position. This applied to each of the supposed peace offers. Whether Anne was sincere is known only to her, but doubts are justified. There is one notable exception. When Anne was waiting in the Tower for her execution, Lady Kingston, the wife of the Constable of the Tower, visited Mary. Officially, she was there on Henry's behalf, seeking reconciliation if Mary would finally accept the annulment of her parents' marriage. However, she also had a secret assignment from Anne. On Anne's behalf, she knelt before Mary and asked for forgiveness. It is not known how Mary responded. The best insight we have comes from a later letter. Mary, who had become seriously ill during Anne's time due to psychological stress, wrote to Cromwell a week after Anne's execution. "I perceived that nobody durst speak for me as long as that woman lived, which is now gone, whom I pray our Lord of his great mercy to forgive." Mary quickly learned that Anne's death did not guarantee a reconciliation with her father. She wrote to him daily, begging for forgiveness, and sent letters regularly to Cromwell, whom she referred to as "my only counselor." However, the king continued to demand complete submission. Jane Seymour's intervention played a crucial role in Mary's eventual acceptance. Jane immediately sought to find and support the king's daughter. In return, Mary had no issues recognizing Jane as queen, given that her own mother had died. She expressed gratitude to Jane for the motherly joy she showed her and ended each letter to her father with prayers for him and Jane to have children quickly. Eventually, Mary submitted to her father's demands. Henry welcomed her back, and she even became Edward's godmother. When Jane died, Mary served as chief mourner. Could Mary have had such a relationship with Anne? Probably not. The circumstances were too different. The very existence of one woman was a threat to the other. Henry, who could have changed this dynamic, had no interest in doing so. Thus, the story of Anne and Mary is not one of guilt or innocence. Only the king was responsible for this debacle. It is a story of desperation and self-defense, applicable to both Anne and Mary. My members find this script in the community tab of the channel. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to support the channel.